I used to have a Qigong master. This is what kind of blows my mind about medicine and about ancient stuff.
Mm-hmm.
This guy is from Shanghai. He could point at you, right, from this far away, and you'd feel it.
Deep in the shadows of a private clinic, Hollywood titan Mel Gibson sat braced for a miracle. Years of grueling stunts had left his body a map of chronic pain that Western medicine couldn't erase. But when a Qi-Kung master approached, without a single touch, the air ignited.
And then he saw a Qigong master, this old guy, and people were lining up getting cured, and he thought, that's really interesting.
Gibson described an electric, impossible heat surging through his veins, a force that defied every law of physics. As he recounted the shock to Joe Rogan, the world listened, breathless. The broken action star. For decades, Mel Gibson was the gold standard of the cinematic tough guy, a man whose physical presence defined the grit of the late 20th century action hero. From the dusty, apocalyptic roads of Mad Max to the bone-crunching, hyperkinetic choreography of Lethal Weapon, his body was his primary instrument. He didn't just play the part, he lived it, often insisting on performing his own stunts and pushing his physical limits until the lines between the actor and the warrior blurred. But instruments, no matter how finely tuned or resilient, eventually begin to crack under the pressure of constant, violent use. By the time Gibson reached his middle years, the toll of hundreds of staged fights, high-speed falls, and explosive sets had manifested as a relentless, grinding physical reality. His joints were a landscape of hidden scar tissue. His spine was a record of every landing that wasn't quite cushioned enough. This wasn't just the standard fatigue of aging. It was the cumulative trauma of a man who had spent 40 years treating his physique like a high-performance crash test dummy. In the quiet moments between takes or in the solitude of his home, the action hero was often a man in search of relief that wouldn't come from a bottle or a surgeon's knife. He had access to the world's most elite orthopedic specialists and the most advanced physical therapists Hollywood money could buy. Yet, for all the scans, the cortisone shots, and the deep tissue work, the core of the pain remained, a stubborn, buzzing ghost that lived in his nerves. Gibson's upbringing and his professional environment had forged a man of deep, practical skepticism. He was a man of the physical world, of blood, sweat, and tangible mechanics. To him, energy was something that powered a light rig or a car engine, not something that flowed through human hands. He wasn't looking for a spiritual awakening. He was looking for a way to stand up straight. He walked in on a skeptic, but he was about to feel the impossible. The encounter, physics versus feeling. The room was quiet, stripped of the humming machinery and sterile medicinal scents of the high-end orthopedic offices Gibson had grown to loathe. There were no white coats, no clipboards, and no elaborate explanations of lumbar vertebrae or degenerative discs. The Qi-Kung master, a man who carried himself with a terrifyingly calm precision, didn't ask for x-rays or a list of symptoms. He didn't need to. Instead, the session began with a simple, calculated proximity. There were no needles, no scalpels, and, most importantly, no physical contact. The practitioner stood several inches away from Gibson's body, his hands hovering like magnets searching for a pole, his eyes locked in a gaze that seemed to look through the actor rather than at him. Suddenly, the air in the narrow gap between them changed. Gibson described a sensation that began as a faint prickling, like the crawl of static electricity on a dry winter day. But within seconds, that prickling evolved into a roar of thermal energy. It wasn't the external heat of a sun lamp or a localized heating pad. It was a deep, visceral warmth that seemed to originate from inside his own bone marrow. He watched the master's hands move in slow, deliberate arcs, and as they moved, the heat followed with haunting accuracy. It was as if an invisible iron was being passed over his skin, radiating a temperature so intense that Gibson instinctively waited for the smell of singed fabric. The shock was immediate and total. Gibson's mind, trained by years of practical filmmaking, raced to find a rational explanation. He scanned the room for hidden heaters, checked the master's sleeves for devices, and wondered if he was experiencing a sudden, localized fever. But the heat was too intelligent, too targeted. It moved with surgical intent, swirling around the sites of his oldest injuries, the shoulders that had been dislocated, the back that had been strained by wirework, the knees that had hit the concrete too many times. He felt the stagnant knots of his chronic pain begin to dissolve, not through the blunt force of pressure or massage, but through what felt like a high-frequency vibration. It was a sensory overload that bypassed his brain's ability to categorize it, forcing him to accept a reality that his logic told him was impossible. As the master worked, the heat became so profound that Gibson felt he was being plugged into a live electrical circuit. This was external chi projection, a phenomenon rarely seen by Western eyes and almost never experienced by someone of Gibson's high-profile skepticism. The master wasn't just moving his hands, he was directing a bioelectric current that seemed to interact directly with Gibson's nervous system, bypassing the skin and muscle to hit the wiring underneath. The actor, a man famous for his ability to project intensity on a cinema screen, realized he was in the presence of a much older, much more terrifyingly real form of power. It was a projection of intent turned into physical force, a bridge between the mental and the material. The session lasted less than an hour, but by the end, the physical world looked and felt fundamentally different. The grinding background noise of his chronic pain, the hum of discomfort he had lived with for so long it had become part of his personality, had been silenced. His limbs felt light, charged with a strange, humming vitality that he hadn't experienced since his youth. He stood up and moved with a fluidity that shouldn't have been possible for a man with his medical history. He looked at the master, a man who had just performed what looked like a miracle without ever touching his skin, and realized that his Hollywood-honed intuition for fakes and con artists had been completely short-circuited. There was no trickery here, there was only the undeniable glowing evidence of his own nerve endings. The pain was gone, but in its place sat a haunting question. How could a human hand hold the heat of a star? Decoding the master, the lineage of power. To understand what Gibson experienced, one must look past the spectacle and into the grueling, monastic world of internal martial arts. The master Gibson encountered was not a magician using sleight of hand. He was the end result of a lineage that dates back thousands of years to the mountains of China. This specific ability, known as Wai Qi Liaofa, external qi healing, is the pinnacle of qi kung practice. It is the transition from moving energy within one's own body to projecting that energy outward to affect the biological systems of another. This power is not a gift or a supernatural fluke, it is a hard-won physical skill. In the traditional schools of Qi Kung, a practitioner might spend decades in standing post-meditation, standing perfectly still for hours on end, to build what they call the lower dantian, or the body's bio-battery. The goal is to cultivate a density of internal pressure that can eventually be vented through the fingertips. To the masters of this lineage, the human body is an electromagnetic vessel. By aligning their breath, their posture, and their focused intent, they believe they can increase the voltage of their own nervous system until it radiates beyond the boundaries of their skin. Gibson's master likely belonged to a tradition that views the body's fascia, the connective tissue that wraps every muscle and organ, as a conductive network. Modern research suggests that fascia is piezoelectric, meaning it generates an electrical charge when compressed or moved. Through specific repetitive training, these practitioners learn to pump this system. What Gibson felt as heat was the practitioner's own concentrated bioelectric field interacting with Gibson's. In the world of the master, there is no supernatural, there is only natural law that the West has yet to map. The training is notoriously secretive and physically demanding. It requires a level of focus that few in the modern, distracted world can imagine. For the master, Gibson wasn't a celebrity. He was a biological system with stagnation, areas where the electrical flow had been choked by trauma and scar tissue. By projecting a higher frequency of energy, the master was effectively jump-starting Gibson's own healing mechanisms. It was a profound display of human potential, a reminder that while the West mastered the machine, the East mastered the man. But as the heat faded into a lasting sense of wellness, the quest to explain the unexplainable moved from the clinic to the laboratory. Science versus the supernatural. While Gibson's experience felt like a scene from a fantasy epic, modern science is increasingly finding the vocabulary to describe these impossible heat sensations. In the sterile light of a laboratory, the magic that Gibson felt often aligns with the emerging field of bioelectromagnetism. Research using far-infrared thermography has documented that when high-level Qigong practitioners emit external qi, significant thermal shifts occur on the surface of the receiver's skin. In some documented cases, localized temperatures have been recorded rising by as much as 3 to 4 degrees Celsius without any physical contact, a jump in heat that defies simple explanation via the placebo effect. The mechanism behind this heat likely resides in the body's fascia, the vast, crystalline-like web of connective tissue that wraps every muscle and nerve. Fascia is known to be piezoelectric, meaning it generates an electrical charge when it is compressed, stretched, or vibrated. When a master focuses their intent and posture, they may be essentially pumping their own bioelectric field, creating a low-frequency electromagnetic wave, often measured between 0.1 and 100 Hz, that radiates outward. When this wave hits the receiver's body, it can interact directly with their nervous system, causing the electric heat sensation Gibson described. Furthermore, scientists are exploring the role of biophotons, ultra-weak light emissions from living cells. Advanced practitioners may have the ability to increase the coherence of these emissions, effectively broadcasting a signal that tells the receiver's brain to dilate blood vessels and increase local circulation, which generates an intense internal warmth. To Gibson, it felt like being plugged into a socket. To a biophysicist, it looks like a sophisticated form of wireless energy transfer using the human body as both the transmitter and the receiver. The shock to the system isn't just psychological. Studies using EEG and fMRI have shown that during such sessions, the receiver's brainwaves often shift into a high alpha or theta state, a zone of deep relaxation and heightened suggestibility. However, the physical heat Gibson felt remains the smoking gun. It suggests that the master was not just manipulating Gibson's perception of pain, but was physically interacting with the electromagnetic blueprint of his body, jump-starting a healing response that years of standard surgery and substances had failed to trigger. As the science begins to catch up to the sensation, the story moved from a private clinic to the largest platform in the world. The Rogan reaction and cultural impact. When Mel Gibson sat across from Joe Rogan in the dim, neon-lit studio of the JRE, the atmosphere was already primed for the unorthodox. Rogan, a veteran of the octagon and a longtime practitioner of Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, has spent decades obsessing over the mechanics of human performance. He is a man who respects the tangible, yet he has always kept a door open for the freaky, the edge cases of human capability that mainstream science often ignores. As Gibson began to describe being physically affected, and in some accounts, nearly lifted by the sheer projection of energy from a man who didn't touch him, the silence in the room was palpable. The impact of this story on the Rogan platform was massive because it bridged the gap between Hollywood myth and martial arts reality. Rogan didn't dismiss it as the ramblings of an aging actor. Instead, he leaned in, using his own knowledge of body mechanics and internal force to provide a framework for the audience. For the millions of listeners, Gibson's testimony acted as a catalyst. It moved Qigong from the New Age shelf to the human potential shelf. Suddenly, the idea of a bioelectric field wasn't just something from a Star Wars script. It was being discussed as a legitimate, albeit misunderstood, biological phenomenon. Culturally, this encounter ignited a firestorm of curiosity. Search trends for Qigong, Qi, and external projection spiked as people sought to understand if they, too, could tap into this invisible heat. But it also provoked a deeper conversation about the limitations of Western medicine. Gibson's story became a symbol of the missing piece in modern healthcare. The idea that we are more than just a collection of chemical reactions and mechanical joints. We are electrical beings. By sharing his shock on such a massive stage, Gibson forced a mainstream audience to confront the possibility that ancient masters knew something about the human nervous system that we are only just beginning to rediscover. The conversation was no longer just about a movie star's back pain. It was about the untapped frontier of the human spirit. The aftermath, a changed perspective. For Mel Gibson, the session was more than a temporary reprieve from chronic pain. It was a fundamental shattering of his worldview. He didn't just walk out of that room with a loosened back. He walked out with the realization that the physical world he had spent his life filming was merely the surface of a much deeper, more complex ocean. In the days following the encounter, the skepticism that had once been his armor felt like a relic. He found himself grappling with a paradox. He was a man of traditional bedrock faith, yet he had just experienced a phenomenon that felt like it belonged to the realm of the occult or the science fictional. This tension forced a deep internal reconciliation. Gibson famously sought the counsel of a priest to discuss the encounter, wondering if the force he felt was something otherworldly or even demonic in nature. The response he received was as pragmatic as the healing itself. If the intent was to heal and the result was life-giving, then it was a gift of the natural order, not a snare of the darkness. This allowed Gibson to integrate the experience not as a supernatural anomaly, but as a realization of hidden human potential. He began to view the body not as a machine that eventually breaks down, but as an energetic system that can be tuned, recharged, and restored through means that Western medicine had simply forgotten. The long-term effect was a shift toward radical self-sovereignty in his health. Gibson became a vocal advocate for alternative therapies, most notably stem cell treatments, which he later discussed with Joe Rogan alongside Dr. Neil Reardon. However, the Qigong encounter remained the spiritual anchor of this journey. It taught him that the will and the spirit are not abstract concepts. They are forces that carry heat, weight, and the power to move physical matter. He stopped seeing his injuries as permanent scars and started seeing them as blockages that could be cleared. Ultimately, the encounter left him with a profound sense of humility. For a man who had controlled multi-million-dollar film sets and directed thousands of people, being moved by a man who didn't even touch him was a stark reminder of his own smallness. It cultivated a newfound respect for the invisible disciplines. Gibson didn't just find a cure for his scoliosis and stunt-worn joints. He found a doorway into a larger reality, one where the boundaries of the human body are far wider than we've been led to believe. He had seen the light behind the curtain, and there was no going back to the way things were before. The invisible force. The story of Mel Gibson and the Qigong master remains one of the most polarizing and fascinating unsolved mysteries of modern celebrity lore. It exists at the intersection of Hollywood grit, ancient Eastern tradition, and the raw curiosity of the Joe Rogan platform. Whether one views it through the lens of bioelectromagnetism or as a genuine miracle, the core truth remains. Something happened in that room that defied the conventional script of human capability. Gibson's encounter serves as a bridge between two worlds. It reminds us that while we have mastered the exterior, building cities, filming epics, and mapping the stars, we are still toddlers when it comes to understanding the interior. The invisible heat he felt is a testament to the fact that there are still frontiers left to explore, not in space, but within our own nervous systems. It challenges the broken machine narrative of aging and offers a glimpse into a future where healing is a matter of frequency and intent rather than just chemistry and steel. As the documentary of this event closes, we are left with the image of an action star, a man who made a living portraying the peak of physical power, standing humbled by a force he couldn't see. It is a powerful closing note on the human experience, that sometimes the greatest strength is not found in the muscles we build, but in the energy we learn to let flow. The master is gone, the podcast has ended, but the heat of that moment continues to radiate, inviting us all to wonder what else we might be capable of if we only knew how to tap into the source. If you're ready to unlock more secrets of human potential, don't miss our next deep dive. Subscribe now to stay ahead of the unseen.